All right. Good morning or good afternoon or whatever it is for you. I hope everybody's doing good. Today I want to talk about the dangers of having preconceived notions about who Jesus is and what he's come to do in our lives, and how that can cause us to miss our calling, or even worse, go off in the opposite direction altogether. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 11, 1 through 6. Now it came to pass, when Jesus finished commanding his 12 disciples, that he departed from there to teach and to preach in their cities. And when John had heard in prison about the works of Christ, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to him, "Are you the coming one, or do we look for another?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Go and tell John the things which you hear and see. The blind see and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he who is not offended because of me." Now, this is John the Baptist sending his 12 disciples. He's in prison right now. So John is the same one that said, behold, in Gospel of John 1:29, he says, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world," talking about Jesus. And he says also of Jesus that this is the one which I said, who is preferred before me, but comes after me. One whose sandal strap that I'm not worthy to bend down and loose. So why all of a sudden has John made such a turn? Went from being completely convinced that Jesus was the Christ to now he's sending his disciples to ask, are you even the coming one, or should we start looking for somebody else? Well, we got, I think, 3 different possibilities, 3 different explanations for that. One is that John could have just been a fickle man. He could have been easily swayed in his opinion and not rooted to anything. There's a lot of those out there. The other is that it tells us right here that he's in prison. And being in a Roman prison is enough to rattle anybody. I'm sure that it could cause a man who's not rooted deeply to lean whichever way and lose sight of what he believed and lose sight of what he stood for at one time. It happens to a lot of people, and that's understandable. The third possibility is that maybe that John had preconceived notions about who the Messiah was and what he was supposed to do when he came. Let's just look at the first one, whether or not John's a fickle man and he's easily swayed in his opinion. I'm going to go to Matthew chapter 3, starting with verse 4. Now John himself was clothed in camel's hair. He lived in the desert. John himself was clothed in camel's hair with a leather belt around his waist, and his food was locust and honey. Starting off, that doesn't sound like a weakling or a pushover or someone who's rattled easily. But let's continue. Then Jerusalem, all Judea, and all the region around the Jordan went out and were baptized by him in the Jordan, confessing their sins. But when they saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to his baptism, he said to them, "Brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Therefore bear fruits worthy of repentance, and do not think to say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father.' For I say to you that God is able to raise up children to Abraham from these stones. Even now the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Therefore every tree which does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire." Now, we got to keep in mind the Pharisees and the Sadducees were the most powerful men of their day. They were the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch, all in one. These were powerful men. These were men who could have you killed like that if they wanted to. John speaking to them and calling them a brood of vipers and telling them that the axe is laid to the root of their tree, that they're going to be cut down. This is not a fickle man. He lives in the desert, he wears camel's hair, he eats locusts and wild honey, and he obviously is not afraid to stand up to the most powerful men of his time in his region. This is not a fickle man. This is a man this is not a man who's easily swayed. This is not a man who's going to be rattled by being put in prison, although that is a tough load to bear. I believe John was perfectly capable of bearing any load that was put on him. That leads us to the third option, third possibility, that John had preconceived notions about who Jesus was and what the Messiah was supposed to do when he come. All through the prophecies, it's said that he was going to come from the line of David and that he was going to free Israel from oppression. All throughout their history, God has raised them up. They've turned their back on him, and they've been sold off into slavery or some type of oppression. There's been a cycle of this over and over again. So John, during his day, their oppressors were the Roman Empire. And I believe that John thought the Messiah was going to be a military leader, just like David was. He was going to ride in and he was going to lead a revolt against the Roman Empire and free them from this oppression. When John hears what Jesus is doing, it's nothing of the sort. He's not concerned about being a military leader or causing a revolt or fighting in any way. He tells you love your enemies. And if you're asked to walk 1 mile with him, walk 2. If he slaps you in one cheek, turn the other and let him slap you in that one. This is contradictory to what John believed and most everyone believed the Messiah was going to do. So I think this is our answer. This is what's causing John to question who Jesus is and what he's come to do. And I think that the problem for a lot of us, the reason why we're not seeing our calling, we're not seeing Jesus in our lives, we're not seeing the destiny that he promised us come to fruition is the product of the exact same thing. We've all got preconceived notions about what we want him to do. Jesus didn't come to free the Israelites from Roman oppression. They had been freed from slavery and oppression a half a dozen times already, and they turned their back and they wound themselves right up in the same position again. He says, what's the point in me changing your circumstances without changing your heart? I didn't come to get you out of the mess you're in just to let you go off and get right back in another mess down the road. What I came to do is deal with the problem that's in here, to deal with the root of what's wrong in the first place. And rather than free them from Roman oppression, he came to free them from sin and death and hell, which is a battle far more important than the one that they expected him to be fighting. And I think that that's the same case with us a lot of times. We expect Jesus just to change our circumstances. God, if you'll just get me out of this one, and then it's, everybody knows when he does, it's right back to the same thing again. We never ask him to change our heart. It's always about changing our circumstances, getting the rug back underneath us. And then we go off and do it our way all again. Preconceived notions about who Jesus is and what he's come to do in your life can cause you to miss sight of your calling and what is really more important. And I'm going to tell you a story about my childhood. At first you're going to think, man, that was a messed up little dude. And then you're gonna think, what in the world does this have to do with Matthew chapter 11? But if you just hang with me for a few minutes, I think it'll make sense. When I was about 6 years old, I had this dream of sorts, this vision that I was gonna be a war leader. I had this vision of me. Of course, at this time I was a grown man in this dream. I was dragging men off of a battlefield. Now, at that time, I was obsessed with military. Already at 6 years old, I was obsessed with military tactics, and I'd already watched movies like Platoon and Full Metal Jacket and Hamburger Hill, which probably not that good for a small kid that age. But anyways, I had this vision that this was going to be me. I was going to get medals pinned on my chest. I was going to be a great warrior, and dragging men off the battlefield. I even had one dream where I was lifted up above my funeral, and there was an American flag draped on my coffin, and the soldiers were folding it up and they handed it to my mom. So I was convinced at that point that what my destiny was to be a soldier, that I was going to be fighting against other men in uniform that I could clearly see. A battle with guns and knives of such, and a fleshly battle. And so I sold out to that completely. That was what I wanted to do 100%. I always admired combat veterans and still do to this day. I think they're the best we have to offer. And that was my dream. I wanted to join the Marine Corps. Forget about college, forget about all that. I wanted to go straight to infantry and straight to war to fulfill this destiny that I had instilled inside of me. And well, long story short, a lot of things took place. I fell in love with my son's mom. That was one big thing that kept me from going off to the military. I got sidetracked with a whole lot of other stuff that I shouldn't have been doing. So that kind of shut that dream down after high school. But I always thought that somehow, in my early adult life, I always thought that somehow I would get back to that. That I was going to fulfill this destiny. I was going to be this, I was going to drag men off the battlefield and have those medals pinned to my chest. It's what I wanted more than anything, and I was willing to die for that. Well, a lot of disappointments and a lot of setbacks later, I realized that, that's never going to happen. And I got led astray, and it just devastated me. I felt like I was never going to fulfill this destiny. And I knew it. I knew it with all my heart that was who I was, and that's what I was supposed to do. And knowing that in your heart, and then coming to the realization that it's never going to happen, it will destroy you. And that's what it did to me. I just couldn't deal with the fact that I had missed out on what I was called to do. Now, my carnal mind, what had happened was this destiny was planted in me as a little boy by God. That's what I was always supposed to do. I was supposed to be a war leader. I was supposed to drag men off the battlefield, and I was going to get a reward. But it was never supposed to be a battlefield fought over power or land or oil, started by some politician 10,000 miles away who didn't ever step foot on the battlefield. God put that in me because I was supposed to be a spiritual war leader. And I was supposed to be fighting a battle over good and evil, over people's souls. And rather than medals pinned on my chest that were going to rust and be destroyed and wouldn't last, he wanted to give me a white robe and a crown. I was always meant to be a war leader. But you see, the devil, he took my little carnal mind and he used those war movies, and he used that idea of what a soldier was to twist it. He twisted my destiny, and those preconceived notions that I had about what I was supposed to do, about this calling that I had, it twisted it, and it made me miss who Jesus was and what he was supposed to do in my life. And for many, many years I walked this earth lost, destroyed, defeated, until one day I found the Lord, and the Lord found me, and he showed me that destiny and those dreams, they were real. that was what I was supposed to do with my life. Only I had taken it, and my carnal mind had twisted it into something else. I wasn't supposed to be out there fighting with guns and knives. I wasn't supposed to be dragging men off of a battlefield somewhere 10,000 miles away. And I wasn't supposed to get those medals pinned on my chest, although I still to this day would have loved that. And like I said, I admire those men more than anybody else besides the Lord. I think that they're the best we have to offer here on earth. But I also believe that there's a more important battle to be fought. The battle over good and evil. The battle over people's souls. And I think that I've realized now that that's what I am doing, you know. When I have guys come to work for me, beat up and pushed down, and all the broken promises the world told them that things were gonna make them happy, they're just destroyed and crushed. And they come out there with us. We do devotionals in the morning. I tell them about Jesus. I tell them about where I was at and how he can do the same thing for them that he did for me. So in a sense, I am pulling men off the battlefield. In a sense, I am a warrior, but a warrior for the Lord, and not out there with guns and knives. But we're not fighting against an enemy in uniform that we can see. We're fighting against powers and principalities of the darkness. And I wonder if maybe some of you have the same trouble that I did. If maybe you're not seeing your destiny come to fruition. Maybe, you know, maybe you've missed who Jesus is and what he came to do in your life. It happened to John. It happened to me. It could happen to other people if they're not careful. And, you know, maybe you've missed the forest for the trees, so to speak. I'm not saying that somehow maybe everybody has troubles and disappointments and letdowns in life, guys. Nobody dances without paying the band. I'm not saying that all your troubles and disappointments are because you've somehow missed your calling, but one possibility is that your destiny is right there. You just haven't reached out and grabbed it because it doesn't look the way you thought it would. You know, Jesus says, hey, John, he says, the blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear. These are all statements from the book of Isaiah in reference to the coming one, the Messiah. You know, John knows the word, Jesus knows the word. He's relating to John in a way that he can understand, like, hey, the kingdom is here. It just doesn't look exactly like you thought it would. It's better. And my destiny was there. It just didn't look like I thought it would. It was better. And maybe it's the same way for you. Maybe you've been, who knows, maybe you've been called to be a great mother or a great father, and you've done that, but you've missed it. You've not been able to appreciate what you've accomplished because you're looking for something else. You're looking for earthly medals to be pinned on your chest. And maybe it is that Jesus has something even more important out there for you, and it's right there, and you just haven't grabbed onto it because you've got preconceived notions about what it is. And look at verse 6 here. After Jesus explains to John's disciples all the things that he's done, he says, and blessed is he who is not offended because of me. Why? What's he mean there? Why would anybody be offended because of Jesus? It doesn't make any sense. What he's saying is, blessed is he who doesn't have preconceived notions about who I am and what I came to do with their life. Blessed is he who can put all the carnal, worldly thoughts aside and see things for what they really are. Accept the destiny that you've been given. The one that's God's will, not your will. Put that to the side. Forget about fame and fortune and all these earthly things that we're concerned with. But look deeply into the heart of God and see what is it that's his will for your life. What is your destiny in his eyes, not your own. think about that. Study on Matthew chapter 11. I hope this has been helpful to you. And we'll see you next time.